What if I told you that buried beneath 40 feet of Siberian ice, archaeologists just discovered something that completely destroys everything we thought we knew about human survival? In the summer of 2019, a team of Russian researchers was drilling through permafrost near the Yana River when they hit something extraordinary. Perfectly preserved for over 40,000 years was a massive food storage chamber. Not just random scraps or bones, but an organized pantry that would make a modern prepper jealous. Inside this frozen time capsule, they found over 200 different types of preserved foods. Dried fish arranged in neat bundles, root vegetables stored in woven containers, animal fat rendered and sealed in bladders, seeds sorted by type and season. This wasn't the desperate hoarding of starving primitives. This was sophisticated food science. But here's what shocked the researchers most. Carbon dating revealed this food cache was created during one of the harshest Ice Age winters on record. Temperatures that dropped to -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Conditions so brutal that modern survival experts with all our technology would barely last a week. Yet our ancestors weren't just surviving these conditions. They were thriving. They were storing surplus food. They were planning months ahead. They were eating better than most people do today. For over a century, we've been telling ourselves the wrong story about caveman winter survival. Hollywood shows us fur-clad brutes huddled around fires, gnawing on frozen mammoth bones barely clinging to life. The popular imagination pictures our ancestors as primitive survivors, one failed hunt away from starvation. But the archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. A story so sophisticated and so ingenious that it challenges everything we think we know about human intelligence, survival, and nutrition. You see, when winter arrived 40,000 years ago, our ancestors didn't retreat into caves to wait it out. They didn't ration their food and hope for the best. Instead, they activated food systems so complex and so effective that they could maintain communities of hundreds of people through months of brutal cold. They had identified winter-specific foods that provided more nutrition than anything available in summer. They had developed preservation techniques that could store calories for half a year without spoilage. They had created cooking methods that unlocked nutrients from foods that would poison us if eaten raw. And perhaps most shocking of all, they had figured out that winter wasn't a time of scarcity. It was a time of abundance. If you knew where to look and how to process what you found. The Siberian discovery isn't unique. Similar food storage systems have been found across the Arctic. In Alaska, researchers uncovered 30,000-year-old ice cellars still containing preserved whale blubber. In northern Canada, they found evidence of winter food processing sites that operated continuously for thousands of years. Each discovery reveals the same truth. Our ancestors had mastered winter survival to a degree that modern humans can barely comprehend. But why does this matter today? Because the nutritional strategies that kept our ancestors alive through Ice Age winters are still encoded in our biology. Our bodies are still waiting for the seasonal nutrition cycles that sustained us for 300,000 years. The foods that powered human evolution through the most challenging survival scenarios our species has ever faced. If you're fascinated by how our ancestors conquered impossible odds, hit that subscribe button because we're diving deep into survival, secrets that will blow your mind. We're about to explore discoveries that are rewriting human history and revealing survival wisdom that could change how you think about food, nutrition, and human potential. Over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the actual winter menu of human survival, the foods that carried us through ice ages, the preservation techniques that worked without refrigeration, the cooking methods that turned toxic plants into nutritional gold mines, and the social systems that made sure no one starved when the temperature dropped below survival. But first, we need to destroy the biggest myth of all, the idea that cavemen barely survived winter, because the evidence shows something completely different. Something that will shock you. Our ancestors didn't just survive winter. They mastered it. And their techniques were so effective, so sophisticated, and so nutritionally superior to modern winter eating that survival experts are still trying to figure out how they did it. The story begins with a simple question. When the temperature drops to killing cold and the landscape turns into a frozen wasteland, what do you eat to not just survive but thrive? The answer will change everything you think you know about human survival. Here's a question that will blow your mind. What if everything we've been told about caveman winter survival is completely backwards? For decades, anthropologists assumed that winter was a time of desperate scarcity for our ancestors. The logic seemed obvious. No plants, growing animals migrating south, brutal cold making hunting nearly impossible. Surely our ancestors were barely hanging on, rationing whatever meat they could store, slowly starving until spring arrived. But when scientists finally developed the technology to analyze what prehistoric humans were actually eating during winter months, they discovered something that shattered this assumption completely. At the Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic, researchers found the remains of a 30,000-year-old winter settlement. This wasn't just any settlement. This was a thriving community of over 100 people living through one of the harshest Ice Age winters on record. Temperatures that regularly dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. When they analyzed the bone chemistry of these ancient people, using isotope analysis that reveals exactly what someone ate in the months before they died, they found something extraordinary. These people weren't starving. They weren't rationing food. They were consuming between 4,000 and 5,000 calories per day. Let that sink in for a moment. During the worst winter conditions imaginable, our ancestors were eating more calories than most modern athletes consume during training. They were eating more than lumberjacks, more than construction workers, more than anyone except competitive strongmen trying to bulk up. But where were these calories coming from? This is where the story gets really fascinating. The bone analysis revealed nitrogen isotope ratios that indicate these people were consuming an incredibly diverse diet. Not just stored mammoth meat, but dozens of different food sources: plant proteins, marine oils, freshwater fish, small game, insects, and foods that modern nutritionists are still trying to identify. Compare this to modern winter survival attempts. In 2018, survival expert Ed Stafford tried to survive a British winter using only Stone Age tools and techniques. He lasted 12 days before requiring medical intervention for severe malnutrition and hypothermia. With all his modern knowledge and training, he couldn't do what our ancestors did routinely for months at a time. The difference wasn't just skill, it was understanding. Our ancestors had identified food sources that modern survival experts don't even know exist. They had discovered that winter conditions actually create unique nutritional opportunities that simply aren't available during warmer months. Take the phenomenon of winter-killed carrion. When large animals die from cold stress, freezing temperatures preserve their meat perfectly for months. Our ancestors didn't just stumble across these carcasses randomly. They tracked dying animals, predicted where they would collapse, and systematically harvested meat that was naturally refrigerated by the environment. But even more impressive was their understanding of winter-active foods. While most plants shut down during cold months, certain species actually concentrate their nutrients during freezing conditions. Root vegetables store energy as starches that convert to sugars when frozen, making them more digestible and higher in calories. Tree saps become concentrated maple syrup-like substances when temperatures fluctuate around freezing. The evidence shows up in cooking sites across Europe. At Mezmaiskaya Cave in Russia, archaeologists found hearths designed specifically for processing frozen roots, stone tools shaped for extracting tree saps, grinding stones stained with plant materials that only grow during winter conditions. The bone chemistry from these sites reveals isotope signatures that match modern analyses of winter-specific plant foods. Our ancestors weren't just surviving on stored summer foods. They were actively harvesting winter crops that provided nutrition unavailable any other time of year. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came from sites in northern Spain, where researchers found evidence of winter fishing operations that provided more protein per hour than summer hunting. Using techniques that trapped fish under ice formations, our ancestors could harvest thousands of fish in a matter of days during specific winter conditions. The caloric calculations are staggering. A single successful winter fishing operation could provide enough protein to sustain a community for weeks. And unlike hunting large game, which was unpredictable and dangerous, winter fishing was reliable and repeatable. The nutritional analysis of these preserved fish shows omega-3 fatty acid concentrations that exceed modern wild salmon, protein levels that rival the best cuts of modern meat, and mineral content that would make modern nutritional supplements look inadequate. This wasn't primitive subsistence. This was sophisticated nutritional science applied to survival conditions that would challenge modern technology. But the most damning evidence against the winter starvation myth comes from growth analysis of prehistoric bones. Children who lived through multiple winters during Ice Age conditions show no signs of malnutrition or growth stunting. Their bones are actually denser and stronger than modern children who have access to year-round nutrition. Adult bones from winter settlements show muscle attachment points that indicate people who were not just surviving, but thriving physically. These were strong, healthy, well-nourished people living in conditions that modern humans would consider unsurvivable. The evidence is overwhelming. The winter starvation myth isn't just wrong, it's completely backwards. Winter wasn't a time of scarcity for our ancestors. It was a time of abundance. They had figured out how to turn the harshest season into their most nutritionally rich period of the year. But how did they do it? What were these mysterious winter foods that provided such incredible nutrition? And why have we completely forgotten techniques that kept our species alive for hundreds of thousands of years? The answers lie underground, in storage systems so sophisticated they would impress modern food scientists. Imagine digging through frozen ground and discovering a grocery store that's been perfectly preserved for 25,000 years. That's exactly what happened in 2016 when archaeologists excavating a site in northern Kazakhstan uncovered something that rewrote our understanding of prehistoric food storage. 6 feet below the surface, they found a series of interconnected storage chambers carved directly into the permafrost. These weren't simple holes in the ground. These were engineered food preservation systems with drainage channels, ventilation shafts, and insulation barriers that would impress a modern refrigeration engineer. Inside these chambers, they discovered the remains of what can only be described as an underground winter pantry. Wooden containers filled with preserved root vegetables, stone-lined pits containing fermented plant materials, clay vessels sealed with animal fat, and still containing traces of processed tubers. But this site wasn't unique. Similar underground storage systems have been found across the Arctic regions of Europe, Asia, and North America. From Siberian tundra to Alaskan coastal plains, our ancestors had developed sophisticated techniques for storing plant foods through months of killing cold. The engineering is remarkable. These storage pits were typically dug to depths of 4 to 8 feet, well below the frost line even in Arctic conditions. The walls were lined with flat stones or wooden planks to prevent soil contamination. Drainage systems at the bottom prevented water accumulation that could spoil stored foods. But the real genius was in the insulation system. Multiple layers of animal hides, dried grasses, and even packed snow created thermal barriers that maintained stable temperatures even when surface conditions dropped to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The stored foods remained just above freezing, perfectly preserved but not frozen solid. What were they storing in these underground vaults? The plant remains tell an incredible story of nutritional sophistication that challenges everything we thought we knew about prehistoric diets. Arctic groundnuts, what we now call Jerusalem artichokes, were a winter survival staple across northern Europe. These tubers can be harvested late in the fall after the first frosts when their starch content peaks at nearly 20% by weight. A single storage pit could contain enough groundnuts to provide 2,000 calories per day for an entire family through 3 months of winter. But the caloric density was just the beginning. When stored in these underground chambers, the groundnuts underwent a natural fermentation process that broke down complex starches into simple sugars, making them more digestible and actually increasing their nutritional value over time. Wild parsnips and carrots were another storage staple, but not the small, bitter roots we might imagine. Prehistoric varieties of these plants developed massive storage organs in response to harsh growing conditions. Archaeological specimens show wild parsnips that weighed over 2 pounds each and contained concentrated sugars that provided instant energy when consumed. The processing techniques were sophisticated. These root vegetables weren't just thrown into storage pits. They were carefully cleaned, sorted by size and ripeness, and arranged in specific patterns that maximized preservation while allowing for systematic retrieval throughout winter months. Cattail roots represented perhaps the most reliable winter food source across multiple continents. The underground rhizomes of cattail plants contain up to 30% starch by weight and can be harvested from frozen marshes throughout winter. Our ancestors developed specialized digging tools for extracting these roots from ice-covered wetlands. But cattails provided more than just calories. The processing techniques turned these roots into a complete nutritional system. Fresh cattail roots were grated and leached to remove bitter compounds, then formed into cakes that could be dried and stored for months. When reconstituted with hot water, these cakes provided a porridge-like food that contained essential amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. Prehistoric turnips and radishes show evidence of selective cultivation that increased their size and nutritional density far beyond anything found in nature today. Storage pits from sites in northern Russia contain turnip remains that weigh over 5 pounds each, with sugar concentrations that rival modern sugar beets. The regional variations in storage techniques reveal sophisticated understanding of local environmental conditions. In areas with deeper frost penetration, storage pits were dug deeper and included multiple insulation layers. In regions with seasonal temperature fluctuations, the pits included ventilation systems that prevented condensation and spoilage. Lily bulbs were a premium winter food in many regions, providing both calories and essential fats that were crucial for cold weather survival. The bulbs were typically harvested in late summer, then processed through techniques that concentrated their nutritional content. Some sites show evidence of lily bulb fermentation that created alcohol-preserved foods with indefinite storage life. Wild onions served multiple purposes in these underground pantries. Beyond their nutritional value, they contained natural antimicrobial compounds that helped preserve other stored foods. Storage chambers with wild onion caches show significantly less spoilage than those without them. The fermentation processes that occurred in these storage systems weren't accidental. Our ancestors had learned to control bacterial and fungal activity to create beneficial fermentation that improved food safety and nutritional value. The pH levels, moisture content, and temperature ranges were carefully managed to encourage helpful microorganisms while preventing harmful decomposition. Archaeological analysis of soil samples from these storage pits reveals bacterial signatures consistent with controlled lacto-fermentation, the same process used in modern sauerkraut and kimchi production. This fermentation not only preserved the foods but created vitamin B12, vitamin K2, and other nutrients that were essential for winter health. The scale of these storage operations was massive. Some sites contained dozens of interconnected storage chambers that could preserve enough plant foods to sustain communities of several hundred people through entire winter seasons. This wasn't subsistence survival. This was agricultural planning that rivaled modern food distribution systems. But perhaps most impressive was the accessibility system. These storage chambers were designed for systematic food retrieval throughout winter months. Wooden covers and stone markers allowed families to access specific foods without disturbing the entire storage system. Some sites show evidence of inventory management that tracked stored quantities and planned consumption rates. The underground winter pantry wasn't just about storing calories. It was about creating a complete nutritional ecosystem that could sustain human communities through the most challenging survival conditions imaginable. And the techniques were so effective that some Arctic communities continued using similar storage methods well into the 20th century. But roots and tubers were only part of the winter survival strategy. The real nutritional breakthrough came with A different approach entirely. One that focused on the most calorie-dense macronutrient available to our ancestors. Here's a fact that will change how you think about human survival forever. Fat contains 9 calories per gram. Protein and carbohydrates contain only 4 calories per gram. When you're facing months of brutal cold with no guarantee of finding food tomorrow, this mathematical difference becomes the difference between life and death. Our ancestors understood this equation at a level that modern humans have completely forgotten. They didn't hunt animals for meat, they hunted animals for fat. And the archaeological evidence reveals fat processing techniques so sophisticated that they could extract and preserve more calories from a single mammoth than most modern people consume in an entire month. But fat wasn't just about calories. When your body temperature drops, you need energy for thermogenesis, the process that generates internal heat to keep you alive. Fat provides this energy more efficiently than any other macronutrient. Your body can burn fat directly for heat production without the complex metabolic processes required for proteins and carbohydrates. This is why winter changed everything about prehistoric hunting strategies. During summer months, our ancestors might target animals for their meat, organs, and other resources. But when winter approached, they became fat specialists, targeting specific animals at precise times when their fat content peaked. The timing was crucial. Bears entering hibernation could carry up to 200 pounds of fat reserves, but this fat wasn't evenly distributed throughout the year. Bears accumulated their maximum fat stores during late autumn, just before entering their winter dens. Our ancestors learned to time their bear hunts for this narrow window, when a single kill could provide enough fat calories to sustain multiple families through months of cold. Archaeological sites across Europe and North America show evidence of specialized bear hunting camps that operated only during this critical autumn period. These weren't random encounters with dangerous predators. These were calculated fat harvesting operations that required sophisticated planning, coordination, and processing techniques. The fat rendering process was an engineering marvel. At sites like Przedmosty in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have uncovered hearths designed specifically for fat extraction. These weren't simple cooking fires. They were controlled temperature processing systems that could render fat from bones and tissues without burning or contaminating the final product. The bone marrow extraction techniques were particularly impressive. Our ancestors developed specialized stone tools called marrow extractors, designed to crack open long bones and extract every gram of the nutrient-dense marrow inside. But they didn't just crack bones randomly. They had identified which bones from which animals contained the highest concentrations of fat-rich marrow. Mammoth leg bones, for example, could contain over 2 pounds of marrow each. When properly extracted and processed, the marrow from a single mammoth provided enough concentrated fat to supply 10,000 calories of pure energy. That's equivalent to 5 days of survival rations in modern terms. But the real breakthrough was in fat storage technology. Fat spoils quickly in warm conditions, but our ancestors discovered that properly rendered and stored fat could remain edible for months even in fluctuating temperatures. They developed a preservation system using animal bladders and stomachs as storage containers. These organic containers were waterproof, flexible, and could be sealed completely airtight using techniques that prevented rancidity and contamination. Archaeological sites contain preserved fat vessels that still show traces of rendered animal fat after thousands of years. Woolly rhinoceros represented another fat gold mine. These massive animals could carry over 300 pounds of subcutaneous fat during peak condition. But our ancestors had learned that rhino fat required different processing techniques than mammoth or bear fat. The archaeological evidence shows specialized stone tools designed specifically for rhinoceros fat processing, with different blade angles and cutting surfaces optimized for thick-skinned megafauna. The fish oil revolution was equally sophisticated. During autumn salmon runs, our ancestors could harvest thousands of fish in a matter of days. But they weren't just eating these fish fresh. They had developed rendering techniques that could extract pure fish oil in quantities that provided months of stored nutrition. Sites along ancient salmon migration routes show evidence of large-scale fish oil processing operations. Stone-lined pits for controlled temperature rendering, wooden vessels for oil separation and purification, storage systems that could preserve fish oil without refrigeration through entire winter seasons. The nutritional analysis of prehistoric fish oil storage vessels reveals omega-3 fatty acid concentrations that exceed modern pharmaceutical-grade fish oil supplements. These oils provided not just calories but essential fatty acids that were crucial for brain function, immune system health, and cold weather survival. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was the evidence for brain consumption. Animal brains are among the most nutrient-dense foods available in nature, containing concentrated fats, proteins, and essential nutrients that are difficult to obtain from other sources. Archaeological sites across multiple continents show evidence of systematic brain extraction and consumption, specialized tools for opening skulls, cooking techniques designed specifically for brain preparation, storage methods for preserving brain-derived nutrients. The nutritional analysis reveals why brain consumption was so important for winter survival. Brains contain high concentrations of DHA and other omega-3 fatty acids that are essential for maintaining cognitive function during the stress of extreme cold survival. They also contain unique phospholipids that support cellular function in low-temperature conditions. Nut oils represented another crucial fat source, but one that required sophisticated processing techniques. Acorns, hazelnuts, and other tree nuts contain significant amounts of oil, but extracting this oil requires controlled grinding, pressing, and separation techniques that early humans had mastered. Sites across Europe contain grinding stones specifically designed for nut oil extraction. The wear patterns on these tools reveal techniques that could extract up to 70% of available oils from processed nuts. The extracted oils were then stored using the same bladder container systems used for animal fats. In coastal regions, seal blubber became the ultimate winter survival food. A single large seal could provide over 100 pounds of blubber with fat concentrations approaching 90%. This blubber could be rendered into oil that provided more calories per pound than any other available food source. The blubber processing techniques were remarkably sophisticated. Archaeological sites along ancient coastlines show evidence of controlled temperature rendering that maximized oil extraction while preserving nutritional quality. The rendered seal oil could be stored for months without spoiling, and provided both calories and essential nutrients that were difficult to obtain from other sources. But fat wasn't just fuel for survival. It was also fuel for technology. Rendered animal fat burned cleanly and provided light for winter activities. It could be mixed with plant materials to create waterproof treatments for clothing and equipment. It served as a medium for preserving other foods and as a base for primitive medicines. The archaeological evidence reveals that fat processing was central to winter survival in ways that modern humans can barely comprehend. Every aspect of cold weather life was built around the acquisition, processing, and preservation of high-calorie fats. But our ancestors didn't just understand calories and thermogenesis. They also understood that surviving winter required more than just energy. It required medicine. And the foods they chose for winter survival often served double duty as both nutrition and health care. What if I told you that our ancestors had access to a natural pharmacy, more powerful than most modern medicine cabinets, and that this pharmacy was hidden in plain sight, disguised as simple winter survival foods? For early humans, food and medicine were never separate. Every meal was also a form of health care. This connection became most critical during the coldest months, when the human body faced challenges that could quickly turn dangerous without the right nutrition. Here's the remarkable part. Our ancestors discovered that certain plants actually became more beneficial during the winter. Cold stress, freezing temperatures, and shorter days triggered changes in plants that concentrated their protective compounds to levels unavailable during warmer seasons. Take pine needles, for example. In summer, they hold only modest amounts of vitamin C. But when temperatures drop below freezing, pine needles increase their vitamin C content to levels powerful enough to prevent and even reverse scurvy, long before modern supplements existed. Archaeologists have found specialized tools across northern Europe designed for harvesting and processing pine needles. These weren't random gathering activities. Ancient communities knew which pine species to collect from, when to harvest them, and how to prepare pine needle tea to unlock its full benefits. The vitamin C concentration in winter-harvested pine needles can reach about 200 milligrams per 100 grams, nearly 3 times that of fresh oranges. Just one properly prepared cup of pine needle tea could supply enough vitamin C to protect against deficiency for days. But pine needles were only the beginning. Birch bark may have been the most advanced natural remedy in the ancient winter toolkit. The inner bark contains compounds that modern science has linked to pain relief, anti-inflammatory support, and natural antimicrobial activity. Our ancestors developed careful harvesting methods for birch bark. They collected it from specific parts of the tree, at the right time of year, using techniques that allowed the tree to stay healthy. Once gathered, the bark was processed with stone scrapers, ground into powder, and stored in specially designed containers to preserve its properties. The true breakthrough came when people began combining medicinal plants with fermented foods. This created preparations that directly addressed the health challenges of long enclosed winters. Crowded shelters with limited airflow increased the risk of seasonal sickness. To combat this, communities fermented fish and vegetables in ways that encouraged beneficial bacteria and boosted immune-supporting nutrients. These fermented foods were more than preservation. They acted like natural probiotics that kept digestion strong and defenses high when fresh produce wasn't available. Fermentation even created new nutrients that weren't in the raw ingredients. Vitamin B12, vital for brain and nerve function, and vitamin K2, important for maintaining strong bones during the long winter. Another powerful winter ally was wild garlic. Fresh wild garlic is rich in natural protective compounds, but these fade quickly unless preserved. Ancient people discovered that storing it in rendered animal fat kept its benefits for months. This preserved garlic could then be added to food, for both flavor and health, or even applied directly to soothe skin issues. Rose hips and hawthorn berries were also essential. Gathered in late autumn, just as their vitamin C content peaked, they were processed in ways that locked in nutrients through the winter. Rose hips were partially dried, then sealed in fat-lined containers to prevent spoilage. Hawthorn berries were fermented into pastes that could last indefinitely while preserving their heart-supporting compounds. Perhaps the most impressive part of this ancient knowledge was timing. Our ancestors learned that the same plant could have very different properties depending on when it was harvested. Some tree barks were most effective just before spring leaves emerged. Certain roots became more powerful after the first frost. Some berries had to be left to freeze dry naturally on the bush before picking. This knowledge was the result of careful observation passed down over generations. It wasn't luck, it was science in its earliest form, and the results were extraordinary. Studies of prehistoric skeletons from northern winter settlements show surprisingly low rates of common cold weather illnesses. No evidence of scurvy despite months without citrus fruits. Minimal signs of respiratory problems despite living in crowded shelters. Strong bones despite little sunlight exposure. These outcomes weren't accidents. They were the direct result of a system of nutritional wisdom designed to prevent illness before it began. Most importantly, our ancestors saw winter not as a season of scarcity, but as a season of hidden abundance. The very conditions that seemed harsh and dangerous unlocked new opportunities for nourishment and healing, treasures available only in the cold. And the evidence for this abundance mindset is about to surprise you. Everything you think you know about winter scarcity is wrong. Dead wrong. And I'm about to prove it with archaeological evidence so compelling that it will completely flip your understanding of seasonal survival. In 2021, researchers analyzing a 28,000-year-old site in northern Siberia made a discovery that shattered assumptions about Ice Age food availability. They found evidence of winter feasting events where communities of over 200 people gathered to consume more food in a single season than most modern populations eat in an entire year. This wasn't desperate rationing of stored supplies. This was systematic exploitation of food abundances that only existed during winter months. Our ancestors had discovered that winter conditions created unique nutritional opportunities that were completely unavailable during warmer seasons. The key was understanding that winter didn't eliminate food sources. It transformed them. And in many cases it made them more abundant, more nutritious, and easier to harvest than they ever were during summer months. Take ice fishing, for example. During summer, fish are scattered throughout large bodies of water, difficult to locate and even harder to catch in quantity. But winter ice changes everything. As lakes freeze, fish become concentrated in specific areas where oxygen levels remain stable. They move slower in cold water, making them easier to catch, and their fat content peaks during winter months as they prepare for spring spawning. Our ancestors developed ice fishing techniques that would impress modern commercial fishermen. They learned to identify the exact locations where fish concentrated under ice. They developed specialized spears designed for underwater use in freezing conditions. And they created ice fishing strategies that could harvest thousands of fish in a matter of days. Archaeological sites along ancient lake shores contain specialized ice fishing equipment that reveals the sophistication of these operations. Stone-tipped ice spears with precisely calculated weight distribution for underwater accuracy. Bone hooks designed specifically for winter fish behavior. Ice chisels shaped for creating fishing holes without disturbing fish populations below. But the most impressive discovery was the evidence for coordinated ice fishing drives that involved entire communities. These weren't individual fishing expeditions. These were organized operations that required planning, coordination, and equipment, sharing on a scale that rivals modern commercial fishing. The caloric yields were staggering. A successful winter ice fishing operation could harvest enough fish to provide 50,000 calories per day for a community of 100 people. That's equivalent to the caloric output of a modern industrial food processing plant, achieved using Stone Age technology in sub-zero temperatures. But fish were just one winter abundance source. Perhaps even more important was the phenomenon of winter-killed carrion. Large animals that died from cold stress, predation, or accidents were naturally preserved by freezing temperatures. These carcasses represented massive concentrations of meat and fat that could sustain communities for weeks. Our ancestors didn't just stumble across these carcasses randomly. They developed systematic scavenging strategies that predicted where and when winter-killed animals would be available. They learned to track weakened animals, identify likely death locations, and organize recovery operations that could process entire carcasses before scavengers arrived. The processing techniques were remarkable. They had developed butchering methods, specifically designed for frozen carcasses. Stone tools shaped for cutting through frozen meat and fat. Techniques for rendering fat from frozen tissues. Methods for preserving meat that was already naturally frozen without losing nutritional quality. Winter hibernation hunting represented another abundant strategy that specifically targeted animals at their peak nutritional condition. Bears, marmots, and other hibernating animals accumulated maximum fat reserves just before entering winter dormancy. Our ancestors learned to time their hunting to coincide with this narrow window of peak nutrition. But this wasn't random hunting. This was precision timing that required sophisticated understanding of animal behavior patterns. They learned to identify hibernation sites, predict entry timing, and coordinate group hunting efforts that could target multiple hibernating animals within days of each other. The archaeological evidence shows specialized hibernation hunting equipment at sites across Europe and Asia. Cave exploration tools for locating underground dens, specialized weapons designed for confined space hunting, processing equipment specifically adapted for high-fat hibernating animals, frozen berry and nut collection, revealed another winter abundance that modern people never consider. Many berries and nuts actually improve in nutritional quality after freezing. The cellular structure breaks down, making nutrients more bioavailable. Natural sugars concentrate as water content decreases, and the fruits remain preserved on branches and bushes throughout winter months. Our ancestors developed techniques for systematic winter foraging that could harvest massive quantities of freeze-dried fruits and nuts. They learned which species retained their nutritional value after freezing, which locations provided the most reliable winter crops, and which processing techniques maximized the caloric yield from frozen plant foods. Winter mushrooms and tree fungi represented perhaps the most surprising abundance source. Certain fungal species actually thrive in cold conditions, producing fruiting bodies with concentrated proteins and nutrients that are unavailable during warmer months. These winter fungi could be harvested fresh throughout the coldest months, providing protein and essential nutrients when other sources were scarce. The knowledge required for winter mushroom harvesting was extensive. Our ancestors had to identify specific fungal species that were safe to eat, locate their preferred growing conditions, and time their harvests to maximize nutritional content. This knowledge represented generations of careful observation and experimentation. But the most impressive aspect of winter abundance strategies was the community coordination required to execute them successfully. These weren't individual survival techniques. These were complex social operations that required planning, resource sharing, and coordinated effort on a scale that rivals modern agricultural systems. Archaeological sites show evidence of winter activity centers where multiple families gathered to process large quantities of seasonal foods, communal cooking areas designed for handling massive food processing operations, storage systems that could accommodate the yields from successful winter abundance harvests, social spaces designed for coordinating group activities during long winter months. The scale of these operations was massive. Some winter processing sites show evidence of food handling that could sustain communities of 300 to 400 people through entire winter seasons. These weren't survival camps. These were seasonal food processing centers that operated like prehistoric industrial facilities. But abundance was only part of the winter survival equation. Converting raw materials into usable nutrition required cooking techniques that could function in sub-zero temperatures and confined spaces. The fire mastery that made winter abundance possible was perhaps the most sophisticated technology our ancestors possessed. Fire wasn't just a tool for our ancestors. It was a transformation engine that could take inedible materials and turn them into life-sustaining nutrition. And nowhere was this transformation more critical than during winter months, when raw foods could kill you and cooked foods could save your life. But the fire mastery our ancestors developed for winter survival wasn't the simple campfire cooking most people imagine. This was sophisticated thermal engineering that would impress modern food scientists. They had learned to control temperature, manage combustion, and create cooking environments that could function reliably in sub-zero conditions. The archaeological evidence from winter sites reveals cooking systems that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. These weren't single-purpose fires. These were integrated food processing facilities that could roast, boil, smoke, render, and ferment different foods at the same time using carefully managed thermal zones. At the Pavlov site in the Czech Republic, archaeologists uncovered a 26,000-year-old winter cooking facility that demonstrates the sophistication of Ice Age fire management. The hearth system includes 7 different thermal zones, each maintained at specific temperatures for different food processing tasks. Hot zones for roasting meat and bones. Medium zones for rendering fat and processing plant materials. Cool zones for controlled fermentation and drying. But the real innovation was in indoor fire management. Our ancestors had solved the fundamental challenge of winter cooking. How to maintain continuous fires in enclosed spaces without suffocating from smoke or depleting oxygen supplies. They developed ventilation systems that could manage airflow, temperature control, and fuel efficiency simultaneously. The ventilation engineering was remarkable. Stone-lined channels that drew fresh air from outside while exhausting smoke and combustion gases. Carefully positioned openings that created air circulation patterns without losing precious heat. Draft control systems that could adjust airflow based on wind conditions and temperature differentials. This wasn't trial and error. This was systematic engineering that took generations to perfect. Sites across Northern Europe show similar ventilation designs, indicating that these techniques were shared across communities and refined over thousands of years. But indoor heating was just the foundation for more sophisticated cooking techniques. Underground roasting pits represented perhaps the most ingenious winter cooking innovation. These pit systems could function in frozen ground and maintain controlled temperatures for days at a time. The construction was complex. Pits were dug through frozen soil using techniques that prevented collapse and water infiltration. Stone lining systems that could withstand thermal shock from rapid heating and cooling. Insulation layers that maintained consistent temperatures while conserving fuel. The underground pits weren't just for roasting meat. They were multi-purpose food processing systems that could handle massive quantities of different foods simultaneously. Large bones for marrow extraction, root vegetables for starch conversion, animal hides for fat rendering. All processed at different temperature zones within the same pit system. Stone boiling represented another breakthrough technology. Using heated stones to boil water in containers that couldn't withstand direct fire contact. This technique allowed our ancestors to extract nutrients from bones, process plant materials, and create hot liquid foods that were crucial for winter survival. The stone selection and heating techniques were sophisticated. They learned which types of stones could withstand rapid heating without cracking. How to heat stones to specific temperatures for different cooking tasks. How to transfer heated stones safely in sub-zero conditions without injury or heat loss. Stone boiling opened up entirely new categories of winter foods. They could extract bone grease from marrow bones by boiling crushed bones for hours. They could leach toxins from plant materials that would be poisonous if eaten raw. They could create hot soups and stews that provided both nutrition and crucial body heat. But perhaps the most impressive cooking innovation was the development of steam cooking systems using heated stones and snow. This technique could cook foods gently without direct contact with fire or hot stones, preserving delicate nutrients while making foods more digestible. The steam cooking process was elegant. Heated stones were placed in sealed containers with small amounts of water or snow. The steam created by this process could cook foods at controlled temperatures while retaining moisture and preventing nutrient loss. This technique was particularly important for processing fish and other proteins that could become tough or lose nutritional value with direct heat cooking. Multi-level hearth systems represented the ultimate evolution of winter cooking technology. These installations could manage 6 or 7 different cooking processes simultaneously, each at optimized temperatures and conditions. Archaeological analysis shows that these hearth systems could process enough food to sustain communities of 5,100 people daily while using minimal fuel resources. The fuel efficiency was crucial. Winter fuel sources were limited, and inefficient cooking could mean the difference between survival and death. Our ancestors developed combustion techniques that maximized heat output while minimizing wood consumption. They learned to burn different types of wood for different cooking tasks, understanding that various species provided different heat profiles and burning characteristics. Fat rendering processes represented perhaps the most sophisticated application of fire mastery. Rendering fat required precise temperature control to maximize oil extraction without burning or contaminating the final product. Too hot, and the fat would scorch, becoming inedible. Too cool, and the rendering process wouldn't extract the oils efficiently. Archaeological sites contain specialized fat rendering hearths with temperature control systems that maintained optimal rendering conditions for hours at a time. These systems could process hundreds of pounds of animal fat into storable oil that provided both nutrition and fuel for winter lamps. Bone grease extraction was another high-precision cooking technique. Bones were roasted at specific temperatures to make them brittle enough to crush, then boiled using stone boiling techniques to extract every gram of fat and protein. This process could extract nutrition from bone materials that would otherwise be completely inedible. But fire mastery wasn't just about individual cooking techniques. It was about creating controlled environments that could support complex food processing operations during the most challenging survival conditions imaginable. The social coordination required to manage these cooking systems was as sophisticated as the technology itself. Here's a fact that changes how we think about human survival. Individual survival in winter wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. Archaeological evidence makes it clear that every person who made it through the Ice Age winters did so as part of a carefully organized social system that managed food for entire communities. At the Dolní Věstonice site in today's Czech Republic, researchers uncovered proof of just how advanced these systems were. They found large communal cooking areas capable of preparing food for more than 150 people at once. These weren't just campfires. They were organized food centers with dedicated workspaces, storage systems, and distribution methods that worked, almost like prehistoric restaurants. The way animal bones are distributed at these sites tells the story. By studying these patterns, archaeologists can reconstruct exactly how food was shared. What they discovered reveals a level of social organization that would impress even modern logistics managers. Different cuts of meat were distributed based on roles, needs, and age. Expecting mothers received organ meats rich in folate and iron. Children were given bone marrow to support brain development. Hunters received muscle meat for strength and endurance. This wasn't favoritism. It was a structured system that ensured every group got the nutrients most essential for their role. These communities clearly understood that nutritional needs varied by age, gender, and seasonal work. Women who processed plant foods needed different nutrients than men who hunted in the cold. Growing children required different minerals than adults. This wasn't guesswork. It was learned knowledge applied systematically to community survival. Gender roles in food systems also show impressive specialization. Women often managed plant food processing, storage, and preparation, including handling plants that required careful detoxifying. Men focused more on hunting, butchering, and processing large game. Yet these roles were not rigid. They adapted, depending on skills and the needs of the group. Knowledge transfer between generations was critical. Elders acted as living libraries, preserving information about seasonal timing, plant identification, processing methods, and storage techniques. Archaeological evidence shows that groups with more elders had more advanced food systems and higher survival rates. But the real genius was how communities connected beyond their own groups. They built trade networks that stretched for hundreds of miles. Each community specialized in certain foods and then exchanged surpluses for items they couldn't produce locally. Coastal groups processed marine resources and seal oil. Inland groups focused on hunting and plant foods. Mountain groups specialized in high-altitude plants and animals. Rather than competing, these groups coordinated production, creating regional survival networks. Evidence of this trade is striking. Marine shells appear at inland sites hundreds of miles from the coast. Arctic fox furs appear at temperate sites, suggesting exchanges of fats and proteins for warm clothing materials. These trade systems were lifelines, connecting entire regions through food and resources. Winter wasn't only about nutrition, it was also about unity. Rituals around food sharing helped communities stay strong during the hardest months. Feasts weren't just celebrations. They reinforced obligations to share, resolved conflicts, and strengthened bonds. Archaeological sites show large-scale communal meals involving whole communities, and sometimes multiple groups together. Preparing these events required planning, cooperation, and careful resource management. Logistics that resemble modern community organizations. Partnerships and alliances often formed around food. Communities teamed up based on complementary strengths. A strong hunting group might ally with expert plant processors or skilled food stores. These weren't just social ties, they were survival strategies, providing backup during tough winters. Disputes over food were handled with care, since conflict could endanger everyone. Evidence suggests structured processes for resolving disagreements about food sharing and storage. Some sites even show neutral gathering areas likely used for these purposes. Perhaps the most impressive achievement was how communities planned storage and rations. They had to calculate how much food each member needed, predict how long winter would last, allow for spoilage, and still keep emergency reserves. All this was done without writing, using oral traditions and collective knowledge. The results speak volumes. Communities with strong food-sharing systems had winter survival rates as high as 90%. Groups without these systems rarely made it through the entire season. But survival required more than calories. These communities understood that winter health depended on maintaining both body and spirit. Food was not just fuel. It was the foundation of strength, resilience, and unity in the harshest season. What if everything wrong with modern health can be traced back to a single moment in human history? The moment we stopped eating like the people who survived 300,000 years of ice ages, droughts, and climate disasters that should have wiped our species off the planet. The numbers are shocking. Our ancestors consumed 4,000 to 5,000 calories during winter months, with 60% of those calories coming from fat. Compare that to modern winter eating. The average person consumes 2,200 calories daily, with only 30% from fat sources. We're eating half the energy density our bodies evolved to expect during cold months. But it's not just the calories, it's the timing. Our ancestors ate foods that were only available during specific seasons, creating nutritional cycles that matched the physiological demands of different times of year. Winter was high fat, high protein, with carefully selected plant medicines. Spring brought detoxifying greens and young shoots. Summer provided fresh fruits and diverse plant proteins. Modern humans eat the same foods year-round. Strawberries in December. Apples in July. The same breakfast cereal through all 4 seasons. Our bodies are receiving identical nutritional inputs during periods when they need completely different metabolic support. The health implications are staggering. Seasonal affective disorder affects millions of people every winter. Depression rates spike during cold months. Weight gain becomes uncontrollable. Energy levels crash. Immune systems fail. We've labeled these as normal seasonal problems, but they weren't problems for our ancestors. Archaeological analysis of winter settlement bones shows no evidence of seasonal depression indicators, no signs of immune system crashes, no evidence of uncontrolled weight fluctuations. These populations maintained stable physical and mental health through months of brutal conditions that send modern people to therapy and medication. The difference was their winter diet. High concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids from fish oils and rendered animal fats supported brain function during dark months. B vitamins from fermented foods maintained nervous system health during confinement periods. Vitamin D from organ meats prevented the mood crashes we associate with reduced sunlight exposure. Modern winter diets are nutritionally opposite to what our bodies expect. We consume high carbohydrates when our metabolism is programmed for high fats. We eat processed foods when our digestive systems are calibrated for fermented foods. We consume identical nutrition when our bodies need seasonal variety. The lost knowledge goes beyond individual nutrition. We've forgotten that winter was supposed to be a time of abundance, not scarcity. Our ancestors looked forward to winter because it provided foods that were more nutritious, more calorie-dense, and more medicinally potent than summer alternatives. Modern survival training still teaches summer-based strategies: find water, build shelter, signal for rescue. But our ancestors survived not by hoping for rescue, but by turning winter conditions into nutritional advantages. They knew how to find calories in frozen landscapes, how to extract nutrition from materials that modern people would never consider food. Some of these techniques are still available to us. Pine needle tea still provides more vitamin C than citrus fruits. Birch bark preparations still contain natural aspirin compounds. Wild garlic preserved in fat still provides antimicrobial protection. But we've categorized these as primitive survival foods instead of recognizing them as sophisticated nutritional technologies. The mental health connections are particularly striking. Our ancestors understood that winter foods weren't just physical fuel. They were psychological medicine. The ritual of communal food preparation provided social connection during isolation periods. The process of creating complex preserved foods gave people purposeful activity during long dark months. Modern people experience winter as something to endure, rather than a season to actively engage with. We heat our houses to summer temperatures, eat identical foods, and try to maintain summer activity levels. Then we wonder why we feel depressed, gain weight, and get sick more frequently during winter months. But perhaps the most tragic loss is our disconnection from seasonal eating patterns that aligned human nutrition with natural cycles. Our ancestors ate root vegetables and organ meats during winter because these foods provided the specific nutrients needed for cold weather survival. They consumed fresh greens during spring because their bodies needed detoxification after months of stored foods. This wasn't superstition or primitive behavior. This was nutritional science that had been refined through thousands of generations of trial and error. People who got it wrong didn't survive to pass on their knowledge. People who got it right became our ancestors. The good news is that much of this knowledge can be recovered. We can choose foods that align with seasonal availability. We can incorporate winter-specific nutrients that support cold weather health. We can learn from survival strategies that sustained human civilization through the most challenging conditions our species has ever faced. But first, we need to understand just how sophisticated these survival strategies really were. Because the complete picture of prehistoric winter nutrition is about to blow your mind. Let's be honest. When you clicked on this video, you probably expected to hear about cavemen gnawing on frozen mammoth bones while barely clinging to life in freezing caves. Instead, you've discovered something that completely destroys everything we thought we knew about human survival. The truth is shocking. Our ancestors weren't primitive survivors struggling through winter. They were nutritional engineers who had mastered cold weather abundance to a degree that would humble modern survival experts. They consumed 5,000 calories daily during winter months while modern survivalists struggle to find 500. They stored enough surplus food to sustain communities of 300 people for months, while we can barely keep our refrigerators stocked for a week. They developed preservation techniques that maintained nutritional quality without refrigeration, while our processed foods lose vitamins within days of packaging. But perhaps most shocking of all, they had turned winter into their most nutritious season of the year. While we dread cold weather as a time of scarcity and depression, they celebrated it as a time of abundance and community feasting. The underground storage systems that could preserve root vegetables for 6 months without spoilage. The fat rendering techniques that created concentrated nutrition with twice the caloric density of any modern energy bar. The ice fishing operations that could harvest more protein in a week than most people consume in a month. These weren't accidents or lucky discoveries. These were sophisticated technologies refined over thousands of generations by people whose lives depended on getting the details exactly right. The medicinal foods that prevented winter illnesses we consider inevitable. The fermentation processes that created vitamins and probiotics centuries before we understood how beneficial bacteria work. The social systems that ensured no community member starved while maintaining group cooperation through months of confinement. This was nutritional science applied to survival conditions that would challenge modern technology. And it worked so well that our ancestors not only survived ice ages, they thrived during them. But here's what makes this discovery even more remarkable. Everything you've learned in this video comes from archaeological evidence discovered in just the last 20 years. New excavation techniques, advanced chemical analysis, and sophisticated computer modeling are revealing survival secrets that have been buried for millennia. And this is just the beginning. Researchers are uncovering evidence of prehistoric technologies that make our winter survival revelations look simple. Navigation systems that guided people across featureless landscapes without compasses or maps. Shelter construction techniques that created comfortable living spaces in environments that would kill modern humans in hours. Textile technologies that produced clothing more effective than modern outdoor gear. If you're fascinated by how our ancestors conquered challenges that seem impossible, you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because next week I'm revealing the shocking truth about caveman navigation techniques that were more accurate than GPS. You'll discover how people crossed entire continents without getting lost, found specific locations in trackless wilderness, and created mental maps that could guide them through territories spanning thousands of square miles. The evidence includes stone markers that functioned as prehistoric highway systems, astronomical observation techniques that provided precise positioning, and memory systems that could store geographic information with photographic accuracy. It's survival technology that most modern people couldn't even comprehend, let alone replicate. But I want to hear from you. Have you ever tried winter survival techniques? Do you have knowledge about seasonal eating that's been passed down through your family? Have you discovered foods that seem to provide more energy during cold weather? Share your experiences in the comments, because these discussions help us understand which ancient techniques might still be relevant today. And if you know someone who's interested in real human history, not the Hollywood version, share this video with them. These discoveries are rewriting our understanding of human intelligence, survival capabilities, and nutritional science. The story of human survival is far more sophisticated, far more ingenious, and far more successful than we've been told. Our ancestors weren't barely surviving. They were mastering environments and conditions that would crush modern civilization. The question isn't how they survived. The question is, what other impossible achievements are we going to discover they accomplished? Subscribe now, because the answers will blow your mind.